let us say that in some state, the voters of that state were willing to pay a lot more money for animal products, so they supported some sort of welfare reform that actually increased the price of animals significantly, but resulted in significant welfare benefits, so that you did have, it wasn't perfect, it was still inhumane, it was still torture, but it was a lot better. Even if that happened, it's not going to happen, but even if it did happen, as long as the demand is there for the lower welfare product, you can't stop the lower welfare product from being imported in. You can't. Basically the law, whether it's the domestic law in the United States that would basically prevent that, or whether it's these regional or global trade agreements, these free trade agreements. Simply, if the demand for the lower welfare product is there, then the demand will be met. The supply will come in from places where there are lower welfare products being produced. So you're never really going to change things until you get people. I mean, I guess you could say, well, but isn't it then better to try to educate people about being willing to pay a lot more money for animal products so that they can get a lot more humanely produced animal products? And the answer to that is, why waste your time? Once somebody's willing to pay $20 more a pound for steak to get, quote, humanely raised meat, why don't you just try to get that person, if that person cares that much, that much about the issue where she's willing to pay that much more money, then that's a person who's going to become, that's a person who is ripe for being educated about veganism.
Right.
So why waste the time talking to her about demanding the higher welfare product? What bothers me is that these welfare reforms are not resulting in anything they're not resulting in any significant welfare benefits, but yet you got people like Peter Singer and all these animal welfare organizations running around saying things are a lot better for animals. That is, I'm sorry, that is a lie. That is an outright lie. Things are not much better for animals. But the bottom line is if you care about animals and you regard them as morally significant, and you think that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering and death on animals, then you have no choice but to go vegan, because there is no moral justification. We would all agree that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering and death on animals. We would all agree that inflicting suffering and death on animals for reasons of pleasure, amusement, or convenience is if it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering, but it's okay to do it if we find it pleasurable, amusing, or convenient, then we've created a loophole that is so large that we've got an exception now that's so large that it swallows up the rule. So we would all agree, I assume, that it's wrong to inflict suffering and death on animals for reasons of pleasure, amusement, or convenience. Yet 99.9999999% of the use of animals that we make can be justified only by pleasure, amusement, or convenience, with the use of animals for food being the most significant use of animals. By the way, I'm talking to the camera. That's the viewer. That's the viewer. I'm trying to convince you out there. We're killing 56 billion animals a year annually worldwide for food. That doesn't include fish or aquatic non-humans, which basically, is probably a number that's almost as big, if not bigger, than 56 billion. So we're talking about over 100 billion sentient beings are being killed every year for food, and the best justification we have is that they taste good. So if we take seriously the notion that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering and death on animals, we have no choice but to go vegan. It is not necessary for us to eat animals. It's not necessary for us to lead an optimally healthy life. Indeed, even mainstream healthcare people are now identifying a number of diseases and other maladies that we're suffering as a result of eating animal products. And animal agriculture is an ecological disaster. It takes between 6 and 12 pounds of plant protein to produce 1 pound of flesh. It takes 1,000 times more water to produce a pound of flesh than it does to produce a pound of potatoes or wheat. It's an environmental disaster. It's destroying the groundwater. And animal agriculture is a larger source of methane gas, which is one of the greenhouse gases. Larger source than is the consumption of fossil fuels for transportation purposes. So the bottom line is, there's no justification for this other than the fact that it tastes good. And it's an ecological disaster. It's bad for our health. So why are we doing it? If you care about animals, if you regard them as morally significant, then you've got really no choice except to go vegan. And it's easy. It's, I've been a vegan for, I guess, going on 27 years now. And I've been a vegan probably longer than you've been alive. There you go. There you go.
You were talking about the Civil War earlier.
There you go. Exactly. I've been a vegan for 27 years, and I have to say that when I became a vegan 27 years ago, it was significantly more difficult. You know, certainly to find processed foods, which I don't eat much anymore anyway, but certainly to find processed foods it was more difficult. But now you can, I mean, there's nothing you can't get. You can get these soy ice creams that are delicious if that's what you like to eat. There's all sorts of stuff that you can eat. So it's easy, it's better for your health, it's better for the planet, but most importantly, it's the morally right thing to do. So the next time you look at your dog or your cat or whatever non-human that you live with, and you recognize, and you recognize how much you love that creature and how much she or he loves you back, and you realize that that's not a thing, that's a non-human person. Realize that every time you stick a fork into a piece of flesh or drink a glass of milk, you're responsible for the suffering and death of a being that is no less, there's no different, not in any way different from the dog or the cat that you love and is a member of your family. And as far as the distinction between flesh and dairy is concerned, I think there's more suffering in a glass of milk than there is in a pound of steak. Dairy animals are kept alive longer, they're treated worse, they all end up in the same slaughterhouse. That's what I would say to your viewer. And there's a final thing that I would like to say, and that is about the relationship between human rights and animal rights. Many animal people do not seem to think that there's a relationship between human rights issues and animal rights issues. Well, that's wrong. Speciesism is bad because it's like racism, sexism, and heterosexism and other forms of discrimination, because it uses an irrelevant criterion, species, as a characteristic, uses an irrelevant characteristic as a criterion for membership in the moral community. And so therefore we do have a position on racism, sexism, and heterosexism. Now I realize that the large animal organizations, because they're organizations that don't want to offend anybody, because they don't want to do anything which decreases that donor base, Adam. So therefore they don't want to take a position on racism or sexism or heterosexism because they don't want to offend people. But I understand that, but that doesn't make it right. We have to see that there is a relationship between speciesism and these other forms of discrimination, which is one of the reasons why, by the way, I really object to using sexism to try to promote the issue of animal rights. I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think sexism is inherently wrong, but I also think that as long as we continue to commodify women, we're going to continue to commodify non-humans. Sexism and speciesism are very, 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 very similar. And I think that I really, really object to these sexist campaigns that are supposedly going to increase awareness about animal rights. And I have to say that I used to be involved with PETA through the 1980s and the early 1990s, and had many arguments with people at PETA about the I'd rather go naked than wear fur campaign when it came up in the late 1980s. And the proof's in the vegan pudding. And that is the fur industry is larger and more powerful than it's ever been. And the I'd rather go naked than wear fur campaign hasn't, in my judgment, done anything. It wouldn't, I mean, even if it did, it wouldn't be morally justified. But it hasn't done anything as a practical matter. Let's put the theory aside. As a practical matter, it has done nothing to weaken the fur industry. And if anything, it's given people yet another excuse, along with many others that we provide the world, to dismiss the movement. Because think about it. I mean, would Martin Luther King say, "I'd rather go naked than sit in the back of the bus"? And the answer is no. Of course he wouldn't. And I think that for us to be using sexism to promote the message of animal rights is to trivialize the message and to give progressive people yet another reason to dismiss it.
Well, thank you for sitting down with us and this awesome interview. So that's all the show we have for today. Also check out Gary's billion books that he has out. He's got a podcast. He's got a blog. He's even got a freaking Twitter account. So
yes, I do.
All that's going to be in the show's notes.
You can go to my. You're going to give them my website and stuff like that.
Abolitionistapproach.com, and
okay.
I'll have all the link to all the books, the whole.
Beautiful. That's beautiful.
The whole thing.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed having you.
Check it out at vegan.fm/news. Thanks. We'll see you later.
The bottom line is if you care about animals and you regard them as morally significant, and you think that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering and death on animals, then you have no choice but to go vegan, because there is no moral justification.